All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Have you ever caught yourself wondering why things like diabetes, heart disease, or even skin cancer are just absolutely skyrocketing these days? I mean, we hear it all the time, right? That human biology is somehow failing us or breaking down. But what if I told you that 15 incredible human genetic adaptations, traits that were literally shaped by the most extreme environments on Earth just to keep our ancestors alive, have actually become these really surprising modern-day health trade-offs? Yeah. Today, we're going to explore exactly how the very superpowers that saved ancient humans have basically become our modern kryptonite. So, to wrap our heads around this massive topic, we've broken the whole thing down into 5 core sections. We'll trace the journey step by step. We're starting with our biological blueprint, then we'll look at surviving extreme climates, dive into diets and metabolism, analyze how we defeated ancient diseases, and finally, bring it all together with the modern evolutionary mismatch. Okay, let's kick things off with Section 1, the human biological blueprint, and lay the groundwork for how thousands of years out in extreme environments permanently rewired human biology. So here's the thing. What we tend to label today as genetic flaws or modern diseases, they were actually incredible survival advantages. Seriously, they were biological blueprints perfectly, and I mean perfectly, tuned for environments that, well, we just don't live in anymore. You see, thousands of years of living in extreme conditions didn't just shape our culture, it literally shaped our DNA. Different ancestral populations evolved wildly different physical advantages to survive exactly where they happen to live. But, as we're going to see, every single one of these evolutionary upgrades came with a hidden cost the second the world changed. All right, moving right along to Section 2, surviving extreme climates. Let's see how this blueprint idea really builds when we look at the ancestors who conquered the absolute physical extremes of Earth. This is one of my favorite examples because it brilliantly illustrates how evolution finds completely different solutions to the exact same problem. In this case, high altitude. On the one hand, you've got East African highlanders from the Ethiopian highlands. They lived at these massive elevations for tens of thousands of years, and they evolved this amazing cardiovascular efficiency. Basically, it delivers more oxygen per breath without thickening their blood. It's actually a huge reason why Ethiopian and Kenyan runners absolutely dominate distance running today. But then, you look at indigenous American populations in the Andes, and they conquered 4,000-meter heights using a completely different trick, jacking up their red blood cell count. But here is the trade-off for both groups. These amazing adaptations actually lose a bit of their efficiency when these folks come down to sea level. Now, as we move across the globe, environments get colder and way more unpredictable. Take Slavic populations, for example. They endured these brutal, never-ending winters across Eastern Europe and Russia. And because of that, they evolved really robust frames and a highly efficient fat distribution system for insulation. It makes them naturally suited for physically demanding cold climate work today. But that exact same biology, it adapts pretty terribly to tropical heat and our modern sitting at a desk all-day lifestyles. On the flip side, you have Central Asian populations who became the ultimate generalists. Since they were constantly migrating across mountains, steppes, and deserts, they had to adapt a moderate tolerance to cold, heat, and altitude, all at the same time. The trade-off there? Well, being a generalist means you rarely outperform a specialist in any single extreme environment. Let's talk about the sun, because there is an intense and really fascinating contrast in how humans adapted to sunlight and heat. Look at Middle Eastern and North African populations. Generations in the arid desert naturally selected for unbelievable heat and water retention efficiency. They can maintain blood pressure under intense heat stress like it's nothing. But take that person and migrate them to a cold, low sunlight climate today, and that same biology often triggers severe vitamin D deficiency. Then you have the complete opposite. Celtic populations in places like Ireland and Scotland. They lived with almost zero UV light, so they evolved extremely pale skin just to maximize vitamin D synthesis from whatever tiny bit of sunlight they could get. The tragic trade-off today, though, is that if someone with Celtic ancestry moves to a high UV spot, like say Australia, that exact same biological superpower turns into one of the highest melanoma and skin cancer risks in the world. But sometimes the extreme environment isn't a mountain or a desert at all. Sometimes it's the ocean. For the Bajau sea nomads of Southeast Asia, free diving was literally a way of life for over 1,000 years. Because of this, specific genetic variants, specifically in the PDE10A gene, gave them spleens roughly 50% larger than average. 50%! This acts as this built-in oxygenated blood reservoir that extends their dive times to just superhuman levels. It is an absolutely amazing adaptation. The catch? It offers absolutely zero benefit if you live your whole life on land. All right, let's shift gears to Section 3, Diet, metabolism, and mismatches. We're going to analyze how the historical diets of our ancestors fundamentally rewired our metabolism, which really set the stage for these massive modern health clashes. So the absolutely crucial point to understand here is what scientists call the thrifty genotype. Think about Pacific Islander and Polynesian ancestries for a second. They went on these long, dangerous ocean voyages with completely uncertain food supplies. So nature naturally selected for bodies that could store energy highly efficiently during times of abundance and strictly ration it during scarcity, basically holding on to calories for dear life. Today, this translates to incredible physical strength and power. But when you combine that hyper-efficient energy storage system with a modern Western diet packed with highly processed food, it creates a severe mismatch. It's literally the reason why these populations are facing some of the highest rates of type 2 diabetes and obesity in the entire world today. Similarly, we actually have a massive cultural blind spot when it comes to dairy. Did you know that 65% of the global adult population is lactose intolerant? Let me just repeat that because it's wild. The majority of humans on planet Earth cannot digest milk as adults. It is the biological default. Only about 35% actually can, and that's just thanks to a very specific Northern European mutation tied to the rise of dairy farming about 10,000 years ago. So assuming dairy tolerance is just some universal human trait, that's a major modern mismatch, and it's caused real systemic dietary issues globally. And we see these intense dietary mismatches pop up everywhere. For instance, Arctic and Inuit populations adapted these really unique fat metabolism genes to survive on high-fat marine diets with literally zero plants for half the year. They absolutely thrived on it, but introduced to modern processed carbs and sugar, that same metabolism struggles severely. A completely different challenge happened in South Asia. There, populations evolved metabolic efficiency for relatively low-calorie grain-based diets under intense agricultural sun. Fast forward to today, when met with modern caloric abundance, they face immense cardiovascular and diabetes risks, and often at much, much lower body weights than other groups. Meanwhile, East Asian populations often carry an ALDH2 variant from the early days of rice agriculture. It causes an alcohol flush response that generally lowers rates of alcohol abuse, which is good, but the brutal trade-off is that carriers who do happen to drink heavily face significantly elevated risks for esophageal cancer. Okay, let's dive right into our fourth section, defeating disease, facing trade-offs. We're going to look at the invisible environments of ancient pathogens and the devastating trade-offs humans had to make just to survive them. Evolution has really forced us into some fascinating yet incredibly heavy biological bargains. Take malaria. It was a leading killer of humans for thousands of years. To survive it, sub-Saharan populations evolved the sickle cell trait, while Mediterranean populations across places like Greece, Italy, and Cyprus evolved variants like thalassemia. Now, both of these are brilliant because they alter red blood cells to protect the body against severe malaria. If you carry just one copy of the gene, you survive the malaria zone. But the trade-off, man, it's heart-wrenching. If a child inherits 2 copies of the gene, it causes severe, lifelong blood diseases. The very protection against the ancient pathogen basically became the modern genetic disease. And sometimes isolation itself is the environmental pressure. Think about Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry. They descended from a relatively small founding population in medieval Europe. Over centuries, community intermarriage created what geneticists call a founder effect. This naturally concentrated certain rare variants far more than you'd see in larger populations, which unfortunately elevated the risk for specific conditions like Tay-Sachs. But here is the silver lining, and it's truly remarkable. Studying this exact population actually paved the way for modern genetic screening breakthroughs, like BRCA breast cancer testing. So the biological trade-offs of one isolated community ultimately helped map genes that benefit medical research for every single population on Earth today. Which brings us to our fifth and final section, the modern evolutionary mismatch. This is where it all comes together and really forces us to rethink everything we thought we knew about human health, chronic illness, and what it even means to be healthy today. Because when we look around, right, and we see these skyrocketing global rates of diabetes, heart disease, obesity, or skin cancer, it is just so easy to feel like our bodies are failing us. It really forces us to ask a pretty provocative question. Is our human biology actually flawed? Like, are we just genetically broken? Well, the ultimate takeaway of this explainer is a resounding no. None of these adaptations make one population better or worse than another, and they certainly aren't flaws.
They are brilliant, literally life-saving solutions to completely different challenges shaped by completely different environments over millennia. The only real mismatch here is that the world our specific bodies were perfectly designed to survive in, well, it just simply no longer exists. The biology hasn't failed. The environment just changed way faster than evolution could possibly keep up with. And I think that leaves us with a really fascinating final thought to ponder. If our modern environment is what's truly making us sick, how will human biology